Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Kendall Wallace, welcome to the conversation today.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Hawaii. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about building team cohesion. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's either bright and early or dark and early there in Hawaii because it's a morning here in Salt Lake.
Yeah, dark and early with my cup of coffee. Yep, that is correct.
Well, good. I really appreciate it. We've been prepping for this for a long time, and we finally have the chance to sit down and chat with each other. And first, I just have to say, the times I've been able to visit Hawaii have just been completely lovely.
Yeah.
The last time my family was able to stay on the Ko'olina side for about a month while I was working at the University of Hawaii on the other side, and I would kind of commute back and forth, and it was just completely lovely, and
Yeah.
we had such a great time. My family pretty much lived at the beach while I went into the university and worked.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I bet that you must have had littles there
We
because
did, yes.
Colina is great for no waves, like safe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was great. Well, you have quite the background. I'll share that with the audience in just a minute. But
Sure.
being able to talk about your experiences and how they connect with team building, team cohesion, I think will be just really helpful to the audience. So as we get started, I'll share Kendall's bio with everybody. Kendall Wallace is a master at creating meaningful experiences that make you feel more alive, connected with yourself, with nature, and with one another. She creates movie-like magical moments, not on a screen, but in real life. After reading Eat, Pray, Love, she traveled the world by herself for 2 years. And for the past decade, she has thrown herself into personal growth. She went from waitressing to creating a thriving career in tech at Meta before abruptly it came to an end. Now she designs bucket list corporate offsites that not only create magical experiences, but also create safety and honesty in the workplace. Having helped over 1,000 people across 75 groups in improving communication, uncovering blind spots, minimizing recovery time between breakdowns, defining work-life balance, and making decisions more in alignment with what moves them in order to become highly effective communicators and happier people. In addition, she is an EFT practitioner and uses it in her coaching, helping people psychologically reprogram their subconsciousness. She now lives in North Shore, Oahu, having been inspired to improve her surfing skills and live her Blue Crush dreams. I
There
love
you
it. I
go.
love everything about that. Thank you so much again, Kendall, for joining me even in the wee hours of the morning. Before we launch on in, anything you would like to highlight about your background, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you mentioned in my bio was, part of my story, honestly, where it says it abruptly came to an end,
Mm,
is the truth is how I got into building team cohesion. I mean, let's just be honest here, is because I was once, fired for not being a good teammate.
mm,
And it really thrusts me into understanding how people can become, like, quote unquote, the underperformers of a team. Also, the importance of kind of those dynamics within teams of creating overperformers and underperformers, which is
mhm,
interesting. And then, but most importantly, how in team decision making, ultimately, like when people are left out of decision making, then the power dynamics can shift. And so this really thrust me into a deep dive over the past few years of educating myself to no end by diving into so many different programs and then ultimately leading offsite after offsite to really create team cohesion. So that's what people say some of your greatest gifts can happen on the other side of like something
mhm.
that really hurt you. And like, let's be real, in the day of layoffs and and being let go, like those
Yeah.
things can be personal. Not to mention when you get fired, like that's a personal experience. And I think that's one of the best things I can offer teams is actually an inside lens of knowing prevention now to prevent some of those things from taking place and ultimately creating better team dynamics within teams.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you first for sharing, being vulnerable and sharing,
Sure.
your own experience. We've probably all been there. We've all probably, had at those times where you've been less than ideal teammates.
You
We've all
too?
had,
You
yeah,
too,
I mean,
Jonathan?
we've all had frustrations in teams, and it's
Yeah.
really easy to point the finger and say this team stinks and it's because of that other person,
Yeah.
but it's often because of us too. If we have a chance, maybe I'll share an example, a personal example of that later on. But
Sure.
I just remember having a stark realization of that years ago, being called out on it by a facilitator at one of these
Yeah.
offsites, and
Yeah.
and kind of blowing my mind. I'm like, oh, I just it totally was a foreign idea to me. But it was transformative. It was really important.
Yeah.
And so the reality is, yeah, I think most people are trying their best. Like most people
Right.
that are showing up trying to be doing a good job and trying to be good
Right.
team members and not necessarily realizing often little things that they do that
Yeah.
undermine team success,
100%.
team cohesion. And that's really my first question is like, what do you think, whether it's organizational systems or if it's just, the things that leaders do that set up, like the common mistakes that set up teams for failure and lack of team cohesion?
Number one thing I've learned is really not creating opportunities for team discussion on how the teams can improve their working dynamic or the way in which they work. So number one thing is that I do when I come in with a team is run debriefs. So you'll
Mhm.
have a team meeting and then we have a debrief afterwards of, okay, what was everybody's level of satisfaction from that meeting? Because then it brings to the surface these opportunities for like people to
Mhm.
just be real on a scale of 1 to 100, and then we'll dive in a little deeper on what that means. But really getting the opportunity to bring those things that normally are suppressed to the surface, but where everybody gets to participate is hugely important, hugely important. So I think number one, it's having the consistent opportunities for communicating around how we're working and what's not working, but as a team, not these one-off conversations, like as a team, because it's a team system, really.
Mhm.
The other thing I see a lot of leaders make in error is getting in the middle of a conflict and actually getting
Mhm.
inside the triangle instead of remaining on the outside position of the triangle. They'll get on the inside and then somebody inevitably is becomes on the outside. That's the way these
Mhm.
things work. So I've in the past few years become really studied Murray Bowen. There was a Harvard Business Review article published a few years ago called "Ghosts in the Executive Suite," talking about
Mhm.
how important it is to understand, the family dynamics that people grew up with, because
Mhm.
ultimately that is influencing how they operate in the team dynamics in the workplace. And I see it again and again, and it's people there's that concept of triangles that Murray Bowen really brought to light that is in the field of psychology, but it really, really translates to organizations and systems.
Yeah. Well, I like that. I think managers often get in the way, well-intentioned efforts, but they often get in the way because just like with kids, with my kids, if I, as a parent, if I step in every last time there's any sort of little skirmish or conflict between my children, they never learn how to resolve anything. They never learn,
Yeah.
those skills. And there's definitely times I need to step in, right? I can't let
Right.
them, be horrible to each other, and I can't let them, be like physically hurting each other and be emotionally abusive to each other and those types of things, right? Like
Yeah.
there's certainly lines, but
Sure.
but
Well,
if I were to like step in every single time there's any little thing, then I'm like stunting their growth, right?
yeah.
And
It
I think some leaders wanting, wanting to kind of be like the hero who steps in and saves their team or comes to the rescue to resolve every single last little issue, inadvertently, regardless of good intention, they end up stunting the growth and the relationships of their people.
100%. Yeah. And since you brought up the kid analogy, I'll use it. Think about like two siblings at the dinner table picking at each other, right? Two little kids,
Mm,
right? You could have a parent who, basically separates them, right? And it just keeps them separated. Or they really need to learn though how at the dinner table to comport themselves. Otherwise, if you keep them separated forever, that's gonna make like things a little awkward down the road, you know? So it's you bring them together and basically just have them, and teach them the way that they need to treat each other by embodying it yourself. That's, I think, the other big issue that I see with leaders is not embodying that which they seek in others.
yeah.
Right. And so like
Hmm.
it's like take the this is the feedback. Okay, cool. But really ask for the feedback first and then accept it in a way that does not have like defensive energy, really. If you want your reports to be able to have receive the feedback and not be defensive, it's really being so willing to receive it yourself and being so just really, it's a practiced skill of just being able to accept it in a way that doesn't have this defensive energy.
Yeah. So you highlighted a couple areas, that are just super
Mm,
common mistakes. Again, I'm going to assume best of intentions. And we know there aren't always good intentions. Sometimes people are jerks and sometimes,
yeah,
sometimes people have agendas and, so I acknowledge that, but we can't always control that. So I'm just going to assume good intentions because I do think most of the time people do have good intentions and people are doing the best they know how.
I
And
agree.
so let's assume that. And if we're moving forward with that assumption, then that gives us some power over how we respond and how we interact within that dynamic. And you gave us some good understanding around some of those types of things that typically can short circuit it and break it down. If we're aware of that, then we can counteract that. We can
Yeah,
try to make sure that those things aren't happening, whether it's us causing it or we see it in other team members and we can kind of step in to facilitate conversation and stop that from happening or whatever the case may be. You mentioned the facilitation piece,
mm,
and maybe that brings up, it's a good time for me to share this offsite example that I had.
mm,
So years ago, this was over 2 decades ago. I was starting my master's program, and it was one of these
hmm,
programs where it was cohort based. I was going to be working in teams in pretty
yeah,
much every class. And so they put us in teams, and I was going to be working with the same team in every
hmm,
class for 2 years, on
right,
projects. And so they wanted us to bond and to be able to get to know each other and figure out how to work together. And so we did this offsite like ropes course and all this
yeah,
stuff like the week before the first semester started of our first year. And I'd done these types of things before, and so they're kind of fun, and we got there and started going through everything, and we're all having a good time. And I'm a good student, and I'm a hard worker, and I'm
yeah,
always thinking, I'm thinking, yeah, this is going to be awesome. I can't wait for this program. But I think back to my undergrad days, and I think to all of those team projects that I did as a student that were crummy. And a lot of students don't like team
yeah,
projects. They're kind of they stink. And a lot of times people are like, people aren't pulling their weight, people aren't, doing what they're supposed to do, blah, blah, blah. All
yeah,
the common concerns, right? And so in the back of my mind, that's what I have going on. I'm like, I hope I don't get saddled with some crappy team for 2 years and I have to like pull them along, drag them along with me and like do way more than my share. And that's what I'm thinking in the back of my head. But we go through the day and it seems like they're all great and I'm gonna have a great team and everything. And we're going from activity to activity. At some point it starts raining. And so we're not able to do at that point, we're not able to do some of the higher ropey type things, like, some
Uh-huh.
of the stuff where
Yeah.
we're strapped in and whatever. So
Sure.
we're just doing some lower stuff. And
Yeah,
at one
yeah.
point we're doing this thing where it's like I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it's like a V. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
tree, and then there's a V, and there's stakes. I don't know if you can
Okay.
visualize that or if you've ever
Okay.
done this.
Yeah,
But so
I can visualize it.
two people get up, and then they lean in and put their hands together, and then they try to step out, and the further they walk out, the further they lean in, because the V goes out, and so their
Oh,
feet go
okay.
farther out and they're leaning farther and farther in. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yep.
Um, and and so the first pair for my team gets up, and they lean in and they start to take a couple steps out, and they fall. And the whole point of this is to communicate and to
Yeah.
rely on each other and to balance, and you lean and you try to get as far as you can down this
Yeah.
V. They get a couple steps, they fall. They get another
Yeah.
chance, they maybe get one more step, they fall. And the whole time I'm watching this, and I'm like, attuned to what they're doing, and I'm like, oh, I can see what they're doing wrong. And the next pair gets up, and they do the same thing. They maybe get one step further, and the whole time in my head I'm thinking, oh, that they're I can see what they're doing wrong. I'm going to be able to do this better, and I'm competitive, and so the whole time I'm just thinking, oh, I'm gonna impress them with how good I am, and I'm gonna get like super far.
Okay.
And then it's my turn, and I get up with my partner, and we get up
Right.
there, and as soon as we get up there, we start to lean, and I'm like, this guy wasn't even paying attention. I'm like frustrated. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
what was he doing? He
Uh-huh.
wasn't even paying attention to these guys. And so
Uh-huh.
he's not like leaning. He's not like doing what he's supposed to be doing.
Uh-huh.
He's clearly not taking it seriously like I am. And we like take it one step and we fall, like literally one step. And I'm like,
Okay.
oh, but I'm trying to be diplomatic, and I don't let it show on my face, but inside I'm just like super annoyed at this guy.
Uh-huh.
And we get back up, we get a second try,
You do
and
get
this
another
time this
chance. Okay.
yeah, we get another chance, and we get back up, and we start to lean again, and he's still not kind of doing it. So I'm trying to like counteract what he's doing, and I'm trying to make up for it. And again, we take like one step and we fall.
Uh-huh.
And I'm frustrated, but whatever. And the activity's over, and we all sit down, and the facilitator sits us down, and we do a debrief. So you mentioned
Uh-huh.
the debrief and how
Yep.
important that is.
Critical. Super critical.
Absolutely critical. If we had not have done that debrief, I would have just walked away being annoyed, and
A
I would
hundred
not
percent.
not have learned anything. But
Yeah.
we go to that debrief, and he just kind of looks at me, and he's like, okay, so what did we learn? And people say some things, and
Uh-huh.
they're all kind of the typical types of things you would say about how we need to rely on each other and trust each other, and we need to communicate and blah blah blah, all the typical things, right? And then
Uh-huh.
he kind of looks at me, and he says, so what was wrong with that pair? Why couldn't they do it? Like, why couldn't they even go one step? And the whole time I'm thinking, well, I know exactly why. It's because my partner wasn't paying attention. He had no idea what to do, and he wasn't doing what he
Right.
needed to.
So
That's what I'm thinking
immediately scapegoating. Yep.
immediately, right? And
Uh-huh.
but I didn't say anything, and I'm just waiting,
Oh yeah. See that and
and
it okay, so just real quick,
yeah,
but isn't it interesting how in this scenario, right? You're still part of the system, still, right? You're not saying anything. You're not a vocal member, right? But there's still a
mhm.
lot happening, right?
Oh yeah,
So
tons in my head.
so it's just so interesting how people think, "Oh, I'm not going to say anything." Like that's the safe place. No.
Mhm.
You're still like very deep in it. That is your role.
Absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, but go
No,
ahead.
absolutely, absolutely. And I have all this narrative going on in my head, right?
Yeah.
Um, anyway, so he finally points at me, and he's like, it's John's fault. And I'm just like taken
Ooh.
back, and I'm like, what? I'm like
Yeah.
literally dumbfounded by it. And
Yeah.
and he's just telling it straight. And he's like,
Wow.
John did not trust his team member. John was overcompensating for what he thought his team member
Ah,
wasn't doing.
yeah.
And because of that, John threw off the balance, and he just kept on, explaining everything that needed to happen and everything that couldn't happen because of how I was responding.
Yeah.
And then he applied that to like other team types of scenarios,
100%.
and how I approached it might potentially short circuit other team environments,
A hundred percent.
other
Yeah.
team types of situations.
These are
And
microscopes, you know? These are
yeah,
microscopes for life situations, of
and all
course.
of
Go
a
ahead.
sudden, all of a sudden I'm like having flashbacks to all of those team experiences with
Hmm.
team projects and classes as an undergrad. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking all those times that I thought I had crappy teams, and I thought it's because I had all these freeloading classmates who didn't do their
Yeah.
part, and they were all like crummy, and I was so annoyed with them. And now
Yeah.
I'm thinking, oh my gosh, was I the asshole?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
was I the one like who was like
Yeah.
completely throwing everything off?
Yeah.
My intentions were good. I was a hard worker. I wanted to do
Right.
well. I wanted to involve them. Like my intentions were always good. But
Yeah.
for the first time, I realized I screwed up. Like, and I screwed up
Hmm.
big time for
Hmm.
years, you know?
Hmm.
And that one activity was so transformative,
Hmm.
to me, and being able to like completely change my perspective on how I interact with people.
Hmm.
Just coming back to what you said about like having those opportunities for those types of activities, debriefs,
Yeah.
conversations, reflection, like all of
Yeah.
that matters so much. And I'm so grateful for that because that
Yeah.
completely shifted like the next 2 decades of how I interact with people, you know?
Right, right. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. It's incredible. It's also very intuitive. Like, why would you not have a debrief, right? After and there's plenty of activities. There's activities I facilitate that are outside that whether it's a scavenger hunt with specific clues with certain teams that mimic the makeup of the organization, or
Hmm.
I do it, other different games, but like the debrief is critical. Like I think back honestly to when I was at a company where I was scapegoated, and like the one thing we never did was we never like we did escape rooms,
Hmm.
cool, and then we went to lunch. Like we like that was our team bonding, but there were never ever any investments made or any conversations about influencing how we work together. And I think it was such a missing. And now that I
Yeah.
do that with teams, like it's so critical to have those moments of aha and being able to then like bring to the surface. I think about too, there was a team I was yeah, really I was a part of actually not too long ago with an exercise with other executive coaches, and it was really interesting because you could tell there was one person who was just used to being literally the leader of every single team. And we're a group of leaders, but she was just so used to being the leader. And it was so interesting because for all of us, the tonality of kind of the it's my way or the highway
Hmm.
really started to grind our gears throughout the meeting. But thank God we had a debrief at the end of it where we could bring that up, and or even I think we even addressed partially in the meeting. But then at the end, it was a really moment of feedback, but also done vulnerably. And feedback is vulnerable when it's
Yeah.
done with from the heart for the benefit of the other. And I remember saying, in really straightforward, I said, listen, you have the capability to be an extraordinary leader, but your tonality is making me want to not do anything you say.
Mm.
It had to be that blunt. It's like it is really going against your leadership. And that was just such a beautiful moment because it also then we left that where she really benefited. And my goodness, the next meetings, the next week, it was all so much better. And it comes down to, all of this comes down to a certain set of behaviors. It's like, what does the video camera see when it attends a meeting or whatever? It boils down people being perceived as dominating or know-it-alls or whatever, or just assholes. It boils down to a certain set of behaviors and what behaviors need to be addressed.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I think that I was that same guy, right? Like as
Yeah,
as
yeah.
the person you were just describing. And
We
you need
we've
that
all
blunt
been there.
feedback. You need
Yeah,
that blunt feedback.
totally.
Well,
And people brave enough to share it,
yeah.
and the safety to not like have any retribution if we're sharing, that it's not going to come back and bite them in the ass.
And I bet she was so appreciative of it.
So appreciative,
At least
so
a
appreciative.
secure person, like a mature, secure
100%,
person will be so
100%,
appreciative of getting that feedback.
100%. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has just been such a great conversation, Kendall. I note the time. I'm going to
Thanks.
need to let you go.
Yeah,
But before we wrap things up for today, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give
sure
us the
thing.
final word for today.
Yeah, so the company is Executive Offsites, and so you can reach me on Instagram. It's Kendall Wallace 123, two L's in my first and last name, and or on LinkedIn as well, Kendall Wallace, with an Executive Offsites. The big thing I can offer to your listeners is if they're looking for some tools or exercises or ways of thinking about constructing either offsites or days or even debriefs of meetings to try and create connection. I actually have a playbook that I give out for
Mm,
free that I'd happily give your listeners. So just feel free to DM me. You can DM me playbook plus Westover, and I'll send it over to any listeners who would like it.
wonderful. Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Kendall. It's been a real
yeah.
pleasure. I encourage the audience to
Likewise.
reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Kendall can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.